Human cannibalism is an occurrence that has taken place since the genuine dawn of human existence, with evidence of Neanderthals participating in cannibalism to certain extents during the Ice Age, and more times than not, cannibalism has been a focus of not just consumption. Taking a place within religion, taboos, art, and history, cannibalism resides within the forefront of human abjection and quite possibly always will. This is a deep dive into human cannibalism.
You are what you eat.
The term cannibal derives from the island of Caribs, where the indigenous people to the Caribbean resided. The Kalinga were the most prominent group at the time during the early colonial period, which according to the tales of Spanish conquistadors, the Kalingos were cannibals who regularly ate human flesh. This led to the Spanish term of cannibal or carabal, which now resides to the term cannibal. There is absolutely no hard proof or evidence that the people that lived in the Caribs ever consumed human flesh or hunted people, but it would be a very helpful rumor to have at the time of conquests happening, and it would kind of scare people off. But the people that are currently indigenous and reside to the Caribs refer to this as a very raceful and harmful, fictitious story about their lineage. But real, genuine human cannibalism is very vastly documented around the entire world and history of man. With Egypt, Greece, Europe, even at one point, cannibalism being so prevalent that the Fiji Islands were referred to as the Islands of Cannibals by some. Through means of survival during famines and innate religious rituals over eons, human cannibalism takes an interesting and prevalent place in the world, in which I must say I believe we are in some sort of cultural resurgence, renaissance of cannibalism being in the forefront of media and used in a lot of literature lately. So today we're going to go through a very large deep dive into the entire aspect of human cannibalism, from real cases to fictitious cases to, at the end of this, a very educational and documentational look at the best ways to eat and prepare human flesh. Now we'll start with the very simple question. Why would someone eat another person? There are way more answers to that question than I think you could possibly ever believe, but I'm going to break it down into two core subsections. Institutionalized cannibalism. In this, it is part of the institution for cannibalism to take place. Say, rituals, cultural practices, or what we're going to discuss very shortly, European medical cannibalism. Institutional cannibalism means it is part of the institution. It is not looked at as taboo, odd, or ill-intended at the time. It is seen as normal in a way. Our other section will be survival cannibalism, which sounds exactly like what it is. Cannibalism that is done on the pure means of survival. Truly, you have to do this or you will die. This is something that will have the connotations of taboo around the boundary crossing act of eating another person. And because this is this channel, we will have a third wild card that will be at the end around the art history section, because this is nothing but an educational and documentational channel. And we will discuss the gratification aspect of certain people and the act of eating each other. But first, I would love to talk to you about my most interested facet of institutionalized cannibalism, which is medical or medicinal cannibalism. It sounds exactly like what it was, and it was a large practice in Europe in the 16th century. At its peak was about 1680. Medical cannibalism is the consumption of human body parts, alive or dead, in the means of some sort of medical assistance in disease treatment, wound care, or various ailments. A large focus on this was on what is now technically kind of a true statement on the idea that the human body can heal itself, like it can heal a cut or a wound, so in theory another body should be able to heal another body. Which nowadays we have things like blood transfusions or organ transplants, which takes this kind of very simplistic core idea of another human's body can heal another human's body, but in the 16th century it was nothing even possibly close to this. One of the largest medications at the time for medical cannibalism was referred to as mumia, which, believe it or not, was genuine, ground up human mummies, mostly imported black market style from Egypt to create this medication. To prepare it, the black remnants in the skull and abdominal cavities were scraped out of mummies and ground down, sometimes into a fine powder, and then placed into a large vase to mainly use to stop internal bleeding. As I stated earlier, this peaked around the 16th century, but there are documentations of people using mumia all the way up into the 20th century, even after we are centuries away from the fact that this medication purely existed on a mistranslation of Latin. Mumia was originally a reference to an Islamic medicine coming from naturally occurring asphalt, typically coming from the Dead Sea. And during translation in medieval Europe, it got twisted into mummy. Like genuine mummy, human mummy. So everybody in 16th century Europe was consuming dead human bodies purely due to a mistranslation of text. Now, of course, the majority of this was being made from human mummies being imported from Egypt, but this soonly changed in the culture as we now had this institutionalized cannibalism. They started just using recently deceased criminals, mainly for the use of fresh human blood. This is something that goes all the way back to ancient Greece, a gladiator drinking fresh human blood. They believed this was one of the most powerful medications you could take at the time, and this translated into Europe where people were coveting the concept of getting warm, fresh human blood to drink. This also plays a very large part into the entire vampire mythos, but that is for a different video at a different time. Along with these recently killed criminals, there would also be European grave robbers selling off skeletons and parts along with that from their own backyard to be made and used into every type of medication. They would make tinctures from soaking powdered bones. They would do eyes for eyes. There was such this, rudimentary level of understanding medical stuff, which obviously was rudimentary, it was the 16th century, but it ended up having this phrase come out of this time. Like cures like, which is an easy format to follow. If you have head problems, then you should have powdered skull. If you're having eye issues, you should have human eye. It was having your problem have the exact same solution. Like cures like. It is so rudimentary level of understanding, but I keep saying that, but it's you can't really knock them because I bet you half the time it was working. And to be fair, if you do translate this into modern times about the whole concept of a human body healing a human body, like cures like, you have a bad liver. If you get an organ transplant, well, now you have a good liver. So liver cures liver. And it all goes back to each other in that crazy way. Europe was not the only one participating in medical cannibalism. All the way across the world, in China during the Tang Dynasty, we can find record of the consumption of human flesh in many medical texts, along with hundreds of documented cases of young women caring for their sick relatives, voluntarily cutting off pieces of flesh to feed their ill loved ones. Under the medical guise of this helping them, again, human helping human. So these women who were caring for more often than not their parents or their parents' in-laws would cut their own strips of flesh off to feed to their loved ones, showing this innate level of devotion and love to an individual that is insane to possibly match. You can't even get a text nowadays from family members, and these women were literally cutting off their own flesh in the guise of possibly helping their loved ones to any degree. This also is a very big example of what we can call voluntary cannibalism. And I think, arguably, the most well-known, especially here on the internet, case of voluntary cannibalism is Armin Meiwes, more often referred to as the Cannibal Cafe Killer, although Armin did not meet his victim on the Cannibal Cafe. If you're unfamiliar with Armin, he was a man that was looking for a voluntary victim to participate in cannibalism, something he had been coveting and thinking about for the entirety of his life. This is not an exaggeration. Since he was a young child, he has coveted the idea of eating another human. He would eventually, on a Yahoo cannibal gay forum, find his willing victim. Bernd Brands, who found himself along in this group, had a lot more of a fixation on his death and other things, but, relationships are all about compromise, so he signed, sealed, and dealed, agreed to all of the cannibalism Armin wanted to take place. The two would create a 4-hour videotape that has never surfaced outside of German courts of their entire encounter of the situation. Armin cut off Bernd's member in the attempt of cooking it to feed it to the both of them, although he ended up burning it and feeding it to his dog. After this incident, he would place Bernd into a bath to let him slowly pass while reading a Star Trek book. He would just check in on him randomly. Eventually, he would end Bernd with a knife to his throat, and then he had a whole room prepped out, premeditated for everything, where he would end up burned upside down, letting him bleed out, and would continue to dismember and butcher his body. All of this was on this documented videotape, which, once again, it has never surfaced. You will not be able to find it. Don't try to seek it out. It doesn't exist, genuinely. but he would end up dismembering and butchering him, feeding on him for 10 months, keeping his body parts under pizza boxes in his freezer. It's believed he ended up eating a total of 44 pounds of him before he was arrested and caught. Although Bernd was a completely voluntary victim, obviously you still can't kill and eat people, so Armin was apprehended and arrested and is still currently in jail. Voluntary cannibalism is quite far and few to find, especially within medical cannibalism. In particular, later during the Tang Dynasty, an emperor called for the hearts and livers of 15-year-old boys and girls when he had become extremely ill, hoping in vain that this medicine could possibly cure him of his ailments. This also led to, allegedly, those who had enough affluence or the finances to match were getting their own private sales of young people to consume them to help them with their own sickness. Since we're already in the country of China, I will touch on the fact that there has been this wildly racist thing that's kind of been in the, throw around things of online rumors and such, and that would be that in comparison to a lot of the meat and delicacies that people eat in China compared to Western culture, there has been this kind of long, rampant rumor that Chinese people will eat fetuses and babies. And a lot of this was spurred on by a performative artist, Zhu Yu, in which he is photographed eating an apparent fetus under the title work of Eating People. It was mass spread as a viral chain email back in the day, and it led to a lot of people believing this imagery to be real to the point it had to be investigated by the FBI. Now, it is in the common consensus that these photos are not of a real fetus, but there are times the artist himself still states they absolutely are real. I'm gonna say they probably aren't, because I feel like once the FBI kind of got involved, it would have came out if they were real. But if you're a performative artist and you do these types of lengths things, like, of course you're gonna say it's real. Along with this, there has been a few times in the news that there have been these mass misreports of the fact that there are these black markets where you can buy fetuses and powdered pills with fetuses, and every time I've looked into this, it all turns out to just be placenta pills, which is part of medicinal stuff that a lot of people over there do subscribe to the fact to, and a lot of people nowadays in Western culture, since there's kind of like that little hippy-dippy movement surrounding placenta, also partake in those. So there is this like kind of constant rampant, I will call it racist. I know people don't like when I do that, but it definitely is to the reference that people over in Asia will eat fetuses and babies because they eat such crazy stuff. Now, outside of medical cannibalism, I think one of the largest subsets of institutional cannibalism would be war cannibalism. Exo-cannibalism refers to eating someone outside of your community. It is often an act of aggression. Up until the 1870s and some later cases into the 1900s, there's documentation of cannibal customs. Killed or captured members of enemy groups were consumed after successful campaigns in areas of Igbo and Nigeria. A repeated reason stating for the consumption of eating a rival post-death, especially in war times, was that it was this final, screw you, of you could annihilate someone's entire spirit if you consume their body, because there, was no body left. So it was this, final message of, true victory to those who won. Along with this, a lot of resources were scarce at the time, so the concept of leaving something that, in this case, was technically, edible meat, it was kind of looked down upon. It's kind of a waste of resources at times. I want to clarify, I'm talking about very small subsets of time and places and people. I don't want anything to seem generalized or this is all what was happening all the time. This is what they do. This is just documented small times and periods and places where these things occurred. Along with that, at times they would believe that if you ate parts of the person, it attributed to you gaining what they had. Say someone was extremely strong warrior, if you defeated them and you ate their heart, you would gain their strength into yourself as well. In more recent times, all the way up until World War II, there were many accounts of cannibalism taking place, a lot in Japan, and there were some in Germany. In particular, I'm going to mention the Chichima incident. In 1944, 9 U.S. pilots escaped from their planes after being shot down during bombing raids on a very small island south of Tokyo called Chichima. Out of these 9 pilots, 8 would be captured and executed. 4 of the 8 would be cannibalized by about 30 officers at the time. One lone pilot would evade capture. That one pilot was George W. Bush. like the George W. Bush that ran this country. This was the I don't get into politics a lot, and I barely alive when he was in charge, if I was alive. I'm not totally sure. Whatever. Doesn't matter. The fact that a U.S. president was almost cannibalized is insane. Now, at the time, during war, there was no stance on cannibalism, so when they officially were able to charge individuals that took part in this, they were only able to charge them with not allowing a fair burial, which was already an established thing within wartime. But after this, I do believe there is stuff within war documents that you cannot cannibalize people. So that's really cool. And all it took was almost the US president being cannibalized. And since we now reached our connection to the Americas, as young as the country is, there is not a lot of cases of institutionalized cannibalism, but of course there are some. Many groups were reported by European explorers and colonizers to have engaged in cannibalism, but just like the Spanish speaking of the Caribs, these claims are unreliable at best. But there are some cases of undeniable cannibalism occurring. A large one being human bones uncovered in a cave with distinct signs of cannibalism taking place to the bones, confirming that the Ixmi's people who lived in what is now current-day southeast Mexico partook in ritualized raids after harvest, as well as some small Aztec rituals taking place during the Spanish conquests involving cannibalism. I do want to take this time to mention that there is this overarching, thought that the Mesopotamians, more often people refer to as, specifically Aztecs, but of the Mesopotamian people at the time, that there was this common practice of human sacrifice and cannibalism. Now, there is undeniably cases of human sacrifice that took place, but a lot of anthropologists and archaeologists actually argue on the fact of if cannibalism did take place, and actually the prevalency of human sacrifice as its own. I feel like there is this, because of media and stuff, there is this, it's almost like factual that, oh, yeah, no, they, sacrifice virgins, to, sun gods, or, kill someone for crops and gods and things like this, and it turns out that is actually a very heavily debated occurrence in history, and we do not have actually a concrete fact on that. But our institutionalized cannibalism would have this crossover turn with survival cannibalism at sea. There were a lot of things at time that were customs of the sea that were normalized, and at one point, cannibalism was so normalized about going to sea that there were certain people and places who would literally bring people onto the crew under the guise, well, obviously the guy doesn't know, but under the guise of, if we gotta eat someone, we're gonna eat Jerry. We brought Jerry to eat. He don't know it, but, if it goes bad, we're eating him. This became so absolutely normalized that they had to actually put it into maritime law that you cannot be eating people. In 1884, 2 survivors of a yacht wreck were convicted of killing a cabin boy for food. This, though, did not technically rule out necro-cannibalism at sea, and it is kind of implied that people still did. It was just, a lot more hush-hush, and, you couldn't kill a guy to eat him, but, if a guy died and you ate him, you're not gonna get arrested like these guys were, but they had to legally squash out the option of bringing people on and killing them and eating them for survival means. That is how absolutely normal it was that if you, when you were at sea, that it was just you eat your cabin boys. It was so normal they had to illegalize it. This definitely starts marking off where we have this no longer a lot of institutionalized cannibalism. It is now survival cannibalism. It is seen as pretty taboo in at what at the time was the now modern world. And the Americas would have some of the most prevalent cases of survival cannibalism. I think the most well-known one, and arguably the most educational one, is the Donner Party. The Donner Party was a group of 81 American pioneers migrating from the Midwest to California following the gold rush at the time, that only 45 members would manage to come out on the other side. I do want to touch on the fact that's glossed over quite a bit is that the majority of the Donner Party was necro-cannibalism. They ate people after they died for survival means. They did in fact kill the 2 Native American guides they had with them under the guise of eating them. And they killed them after they essentially hunted them after they ran away because someone in the group said, hey, they're gonna kill and eat you guys. So these 2 guides left, and after 9 days they were found and they killed and ate them anyway. It's really kind of brushed over a lot of the time that totally happened, but that totally happened. After multiple unfortunate choices, like going by a never-tested ran shortcut and accidental events, the majority of the group were forced to survive off the cannibalism of each other's family members. At least 6 individuals were cannibalized by the desolate group, and it was taken in care and consideration that members did not eat members of their own family. They kind of had this system to allow that to not happen, and I will say not everyone who was in the Donner Party actually ate human flesh. It was just a majority of them, and there are a lot of conflicting statements with things in the Donner Parties, but now that we have about, like, God, so many years, they ate people. Sometimes you'll see stuff where they try to be like, no, they didn't eat people. Like, we now have enough over time stuff. They absolutely ate people, so. Again, survival cannibalism is survival cannibalism. This was something that these people objectively had to do. It is one of those unfortunate cases of, like, do or die. But I think it is very interesting how kind of ingrained the Donner Party is into, like, American history. I feel like most people with American education would be able to have this reference to the Donner Party. Of course, no one remembers anything about it other than the cannibalism, but it's very interesting, again, just how prevalent and ingrained this ultimate boundary-crossing taboo is to the populace. I also do want to, real quick, if you have never seen Cannibal the Musical, it's from the guys that made South Park, and they made it with Trauma before they ever made South Park. It kind of plays off the whole Donner Party thing in their own way. It's a very bad, amazing movie, so if you've not seen Cannibal the Musical, please see Cannibal the Musical. It's so good, I love it. I have like the deluxe VHS of it, it's so good. Outside of real-life occurrences, America would also have cannibalism takes its place within folklore and mythos, which has been an occurrence since the Greeks, with the tales of Saturn eating his son inspiring great works of art, influencing depictions of macabre and visceral acts translated to canvas, and in storytelling and showing the opposition to institutional cannibalism more often than not in folklore. The cannibal is seen as a villainous act. Eating another is an evil entity. It is not something that is seen within this means of survival. I think one of the most well-known depictions of this, especially within the Americas, would be the indigenous people's depiction of the Wendigo. A creature appearing in Algonquian-speaking people's belief system is that of the Wendigo. Although there are some variants on the creature and story depending on the exact group, there is a constant overarching theme that the Wendigo is a malicious, cannibalistic being or spirit which has the capability of possessing an individual. The concept of a Wendigo makes complete sense in this belief system and its representation for those who live off of the land. In a way, it represents the winter. It is a cold, unkind being. More often than on depiction, it is a skeletal-esque figure that shows the possibility of starvation, famine. The winters are cold and unforgiving, and this is when you have no crops and you are just there surviving. The Wendigo can also show aspects of greed, gluttony, never becoming satisfied. A lot of time within the lore is the fact that a Wendigo can eat a person and just grow in size. It'll never be satiated. It'll always want more. It makes total sense to have a creature of this type within a belief system of people living off the land, and just, you have to have your yin to your yang, and you have to have this bad, brutal, nasty aspect to have these really nice, good aspects to have something to appreciate, and having this contrast within a belief system. Now, the Wendigo is one of the things that has taken off like such a complete life of its own outside of indigenous people and their belief system into general pop culture and horror. I think the most relevant use of Wendigo imagery, especially with what we're discussing today, would be the stag man that takes place in the TV show Hannibal. In this, there's the visual usage of a raven stag, which through the show at times appears a man mixed with a stag, which is a common visual representation of the Wendigo. And this creature ends up being a visual for the at time unknown cannibal killer, which was Hannibal Lecter, showing us this prequel to Silence of the Lambs, which I think is the only time we will ever have Oscar-worthy cannibals running around. Hannibal Lecter is absolutely, I think, a pivotal point in cannibalism for media. Before this time, although this is not the only existence, okay, before you start commenting about it, okay, I'm just saying, Silence of the Lambs was an Oscar. Like, this put a different view of cannibalism into the general public. A lot of the previous interpretations of cannibal in horror were things like The Hills Have Eyes, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. In a way, this, like, backroads, low IQ activity, and now in turn you had a doctor who was uber talented and very intellectual, who was a cannibal. I think this absolutely pivots the concept of cannibalism in media, and of course, as I stated, that is nothing new, but this starts this cultural shift. Along with this, it definitely invites this idea of love in cannibalism and how these two things work synonymously with each other. This has had such an insane surge within media and art and internet. There's always been this metaphor and interpretation, but the definitive relation between the two is consuming these spaces whole, literally. This also brings us to the counterpart of exocannibalism, which is endocannibalism. Endocannibalism is when you're eating one of your own, part of your community. A lot of this is going to be funerary cannibalism. In particular, I'd like to stuff the 4 people of Papua New Guinea, where they actually, unfortunately, were victims of a neurodegenerative disease that derives from eating infected protein of humans, the prions that are in the brain, and led to a new disease being formed called Guro. Practices of the 4 people were that deceased family members were traditionally cooked and eaten, which was thought to help free the spirit of the dead. In particular, the brain was eaten by women and children, which led to the spread of the disease, which would eventually shut down the body completely. The disease would start showing itself with tremors, and eventually you would start losing control and ability of your entire body, just slowly breaking the brain down. The practice of funerary cannibalism was actually quite common in a lot of tribes due to this kind of last final act of devotion or love to your individual. You are freeing them in a way, so it was one of the last ways to show love to your loved one. Luckily, there were people that came into the tribe and were able to figure out it was essentially the funerary cannibalism that was causing this disease. So even though it took about 10 to 50 years to officially eliminate out of the populace, they stopped in the 1960s of their funerary customs, and the disease no longer started spreading within their tribe. Now to us, the concept of eating your loved one, especially with a lot of Western culture around funerals, probably seems like a very insane, crazy thing to do, but there is a lot of relation between cannibalism and love. How, you may ask? Love can have you lose yourself into someone else, all-consuming, having no start and end of each other, like an uzumaki, a carnal desire of consumption, emotionally, physically, and spiritually, two becoming one. What more can you merge than having someone literally within you, and this spiritual aspect of them never being away from you as you've literally consumed them? There is only one. There is no longer the separation between the two of you. When you get into romance, there's this double entendre of being inside one another, and it's the metamorphosis of becoming a new being together. You can even get into the gore aspects of it, a way of this intimacy of being inside of someone in a way no one has before, the wet, squishy entrails of an individual, this new sensation, sensory experience, and just like a sense of intimacy in a way. The best piece of recent media, and possibly even just media in general, I think portrays this synonymous idea of cannibalism and love is the film Bones and All. In this, an 18-year-old girl, Maren, thinks she's the only cannibal alive as she has this natural compulsion she at times cannot control. But she ends up meeting another teenage cannibal, a boy named Lee. We then watch these two try to navigate the world, both believing their compulsion makes them monsters, and eventually they choose to try to live as normal people together, but their past catches up to them, and another eater, which is the term of cannibals in this film, actually kills Lee. We then get this climax scene of Lee asking Maren to eat him, asking her if he's bad, and that it's beautiful. It's the easiest thing, Maren. Love. Just love me and eat me. Bring us full circle to this relation of love and cannibalism, and it is filmed in a way that you can tell this is not the same way Maren ate earlier in the film. There's this innate level of intimacy in the faces she makes during this, and it portrays itself as a scene of lovemaking, even though she is quite literally eating him. And the way they film and have the relation in this film is just so good. This is just so good. This is because a lot of the times I feel like in the cannibalism aspect with movies, even if the connotation is this love aspect, it's kind of done in an overarching, like, I don't want to say cheesy or like gore. I don't know. There's something about the way they did this that is very poetic, and it is very visceral and engaging, and it is just without a doubt the best piece of media surrounding the concept that love is cannibalism and all-encompassing, and there is no way of being closer than genuinely eating. A kiss is the beginning of cannibalism. Like, it is It is just so perfectly executed in this film. This final scene of pleasure gratification from the act of cannibalism brings us back into the real world with individuals like Armin and the most well-known US cannibal, Jeffrey Dahmer, who killed 17 boys and men, consuming a big majority of them under the guise of he wanted to eat them, so they were with him forever. I feel like a lot of people have at least some sort of knowledge about Jeffrey Dahmer and his crimes, so I would like to pivot to the Japanese cannibal, Issei Sagawa. In June of 1981, Sagawa, in France for school, invited his classmate Renee to his apartment to help translate poetry for schoolwork. Unbeknownst to her, he had already premeditated his plan that he carried out on killing and eating and necrophiling Renee, under the guise of wanting to absorb her qualities of strength and beauty, seeing himself as weak and ugly, which is exactly what he was. This is similar to the ideology I mentioned a bit earlier with exocannibalism, of the concept of eating someone to acquire their attributes. This is exactly what he claims he was doing at the time. He was quickly and promptly arrested by Parisian police once he was trying to dispose of Renee within a suitcase, very obviously in a very public place, and whatever. He went, I hate this man. He was quickly arrested, and during trial he was seen as criminally insane by the Parisian police, and he was sent to an institution. With how large his case got publicity rise, he became one of those weird, like, criminal celebrity situations, so they actually were inclined to deport him back to his home country of Japan, which they ended up choosing to do after 2 years of institution in Paris. The issue with this is, due to the fact that he was seen as criminally insane and put in an institution, his case was technically closed when in Paris. Because this happened, the court cases were completely sealed away and the Japanese police could not access this. So when he went to Japan and was evaluated for his mental stability, they deemed him completely sane, and that he did this crime for his own pleasure gratification, because that's literally what he did. So the fact that his stuff was sealed, they could not retry him in Japan. This led to him being a free man. He killed, necrophiled, and ate a woman, and served about 2 years in a mental institution, and was just allowed out freely into the world. I remember I first learned about him when I was in high school, and they had a documentary about him on Best Gore, and I remember watching it, and I've just had this innate, like recall of him and, like, everything he did, and if I can find the documentary, I'll put it up here. It was a very good, comprehensive documentary on the situation. I believe they even talked to him in it, and it is just such a fault in the legal system that this man was just able to walk free. He ended up becoming, like, for a small period of time, he was like an F-list celebrity, and he was like in a few like cameos and like weird gratification films, and then he eventually tried to just be a writer, but was going by his legal name, so he couldn't get work anywhere, rightfully so, and they like attempted to complain about it, and then he ended up dying of some health issues, so he's no longer here, which honestly, good riddance. Sagawa had no shame in his crime at all and openly discussed it to the utmost degree, and this takes us to the part of the video where I will now currently be discussing in pretty grave detail what human flesh tastes like, what parts you would eat, how you would cook it, everything surrounding that, again, purely from an educational, documentational standpoint. This is something that can be deemed or come across to certain individuals as extremely disturbing, upsetting. If you believe this is something that will upset you, disturb you, please skip over this, leave this video, whatever you have to do for yourself. I also want to acknowledge I can completely understand where this can be deemed as insensitive or inappropriate to discuss. I completely understand that mindset. I, like most people, do have this macabre, innate fascination with certain things, and we do have a lot of educational and documentational pieces about this and the occurrence of it. This is unfortunately something that happens, and I think it is, again, it's a morbid curiosity. A lot of people have this question and would like to know, and I am here to answer that question to the best degree I can in a manner that I try to make this. I'm not here to make shock content. I don't want to make things to upset people or just like disturb people. I am truly coming here from a morbid fascination, curiosity, and educational standpoint. I don't want to upset anyone. I don't want people to feel like that is my intention or my goal, or to be inappropriate and insensitive. So Genuinely, I am coming to you from an educational standpoint. If you think this is something that will upset you and disturb you, please feel free to leave this video. I will see you in the next one or at a later date. So arguably, one of the most taboo thoughts and questions to have. What does human flesh taste like? Just like about anything eaten by individuals, there is going to be a big array of answers to this question. You won't find a lot of a general consensus. Taste buds are like fingerprints. Everyone's going to have different answers, but we do have quite a few answers to this by documented real cannibals. Human meat will be considered a red meat, and it will be most visually similar to that of beef, due to the concentration of myoglobins in the human muscle, distinctly putting it into the red meat category. The way the myoglobins and the condensation they have within humans is the most similar to that of cow. Multiple cannibals have equated the taste, though, to pork. The most common theme you will find is human meat tastes like pork. This kind of chalks up to part of the reasoning of the term of long pig that is used. If you see people use the term long pig, they're referring to human meat. Human consumption has this slang term of long pig. One of the individuals who compared human meat to pork was Armin Meiwes, who we discussed earlier. Armin himself stated, "It was a feeling I can't really describe. I'd spend over 40 years longing for it, dreaming about it. And now I was getting that feeling. I was actually achieving this perfect inner connection through his flesh. The flesh tastes like pork, but stronger." Even with German murderers, Franz Hermann and Karl Grossmann, who sold human meat to unknowing individuals, they sold the meat under the guise of it being pork, even selling this from a hot dog stand. These are just a handful of examples of individuals referring to human meat to being like pork, but that is absolutely not the only point of reference we have. A very differing opinion would come from a journalist, William Seabrook, who partook of human flesh on a trip to West Africa in the 1990s, and stated on this in his book one of the most detailed descriptions we have about what it is like to consume human flesh. It was good. Fully developed veal. Not young, but not yet beef. It was very definitely like that. And it was not like any other meat I ever tasted. It was so nearly like good, fully developed veal that I think no person with a palate of ordinary, normal sensitiveness could distinguish it from veal. It was mild, good meat, with no other sharply defined or highly characteristic tastes, such as, for instance, goat, high game, and pork have. The steak was slightly tougher than prime veal, a little stringy, but not too tough or stringy to be agreeably edible. The roast from which I cut and ate a central slice was tender, and in color, texture, smell, as well as taste strengthened my certainty that of all the meats we habitually know, veal is the one meat to which the meat is accurately comparable. While this is one of the most descriptive statements we have on it, this actually could be completely fictitious, because it turns out he later came out and said that he was not able to partake in the ritual practices of the tribes he was with. He then states he was able to taste human flesh by getting samples from a friend at a Parisian mortuary and getting necro-cannibalism samples, which you wouldn't know from what he said, so arguably this is a gray area on the matter. I will say I particularly am inclined to dismiss this and say he did not eat human flesh. It is, though, said that when cooking human flesh, it is visually similar to veal in the fact that human flesh typically will gray as you eat it. These statements on the taste of human flesh all come from non-survival cannibalism, so I think it's important we touch on to that. In particular, one of the 16 survivors of the Air Force Flight 571 disaster stated that the meat was tough, tasteless, and odorless. I swallowed it with disgust. I felt my entire body rejecting that tiny bite. A taboo of thousands of years had been crushed in my mouth. Along with this differing opinion, Sagawa, who we mentioned earlier, had a very different relation to human flesh as well. He spoke at great length, saying that the buttocks melted on his tongue like raw tuna, and that his favorite meat was the neck. However, he said he didn't like the chest because it was just far too greasy, which is actually a very different perspective on select pieces of human to consume. He himself said he did not like the chest, but that was considered a coveted piece of meat to other individuals. There's various accounts that the chest are a preferred part to consume, with multiple groups in Africa referring to the palms, chest, and thighs as the tastiest and preferred parts to ingest. as well as Alfred Packer, a miner on an expedition in the Rocky Mountains, murdered and ate 5 members of his group. He told a journalist that chest muscle was the sweetest meat he had ever tasted. There is a lot of back and forth you'll see with people discussing the consumption of human, where some people prefer these fatty parts and other people don't, but that's kind of just an aspect of meat in general, I believe. I don't eat meat, actually, but for me, with how much fat on humans there is, that, like, yellow pilly milly layer, and how much there is, like, you see the diagrams of fat on individuals, I can't imagine that tasting good, but there are multiple accounts that people enjoyed that part the most. Outside of just the cuts of an individual, a large aspect on how something will taste is how it is cooked, and there's actually an intriguing amount of back and forth on how humans have been cooked over time, between anthropologists genuinely having arguments about it. There are some anthropologists on the matter who argue that almost all human preparation was boiling, or at some rare occasions roasting, whereas other anthropologists argue that there is a mass variety in preparation. I definitely subscribe to the idea of variety. Also, that's my dog. I myself subscribe to the idea of variety within preparation, because the idea of, like, this is the only way you're gonna cook a person is kind of odd. More often than not, when you actually look at how people were cooking people to eat, it was similar to how they were cooking meat at the time. Like in China, when people were participating in cannibalism, a lot of people were broiled or roasted, sometimes even pickled into salts or wines, cooked down into stews. Just exactly how they would prepare any other protein for consumption. It was how they consumed humans. And I think that plays part into the other aspect of them recounting people boiling or roasting. I think that was kind of just the only way they really prepared meat to begin with. The idea of, there's a lot of back and forth with anthropologists surrounding cannibalism, which is actually really intriguing. There are whole books people have written trying to argue that cannibalism didn't even really take place, even though we have physical evidence. Like, we literally have, like, mandibles with bite marks. Like, there is definitive evidence that cannibalism has absolutely taken place over history, and there are some people who want to argue it hasn't, which I can understand the mindset, because there also was a lot of really racist rumors and contradictory statements, like how these European explorers would come over and be like, they were savages and they're eating people, and then at home they're literally eating ground up mummy to stop internal bleeding. There is this hypocrisy and, like, weird conditions that surround cannibalism in times and places, which is a whole part of the whole institutionalized cannibalism. Is like, there were times in history when this was like whatever, and then there are times where this is, like, in our current standing in our modern world, it is an ultimate absolute taboo, and it is seen as something that is extremely deprived and, like, disgusting to participate in. I found it interesting that actually whole spit roasting of individuals was actually a fairly common practice that took place, and it was very widespread with cannibalism, even at archaeological sites in Germany, in times of extreme famine in Egypt and China, as well as the Solomon Islands. Spit roasting was objectively the most effective way to consume such a large part of individual. Because this is depicted in, like, cannibal holocaust and stuff, I personally was like, there's no way. A lot of people who have pleasure gratification relating to cannibalism, they love the spit roasting. Like, I go on, it's not bad, but, like, there's a lot of, I've been researching for a particular video since I started making videos. It's been like 8 months of me working on this one video, and a lot of it is archival stuff from old gratification websites and forums, and there is a hyperfixation on spit roasting and barbecuing. I tell my friends this, so I will tell all of you here for your own safety if you do not wish to participate in this. More often than not, if you are a pretty girl, let's just say everyone's a pretty girl, okay? Including you. You're a pretty girl. Don't post pictures of yourself eating barbecue on the internet. You're gonna think I'm insane, and that sounds objectively insane. From my personal research within cannibal forums and groups of role-playing and things of that nature, all that, they will just rip pictures of women eating barbecue off the internet and post it and have their fantasy stories attached, and that, like, you're eating another pretty girl, or you're even eating them. If you do not want cannibal role players to have the option to use your photos. Don't post yourself eating barbecue on the internet. And I'm saying that with full intent as someone who has spent time looking at things genuinely. And with the cultural current standing of cannibalism to be obviously an absolutely taboo, disturbing, disgusting act to participate in it, I will mention there is only one US state with actual legal laws against cannibalism, and it is Idaho. The only thing I know about Idaho is potatoes, and that cannibalism is explicitly illegal there. There is a lot of laws that surround a lot of things with corpses, like we've talked about necrophilia, where desecration of corpse, messing with burial stuff, things around that nature is how you could, in theory, get, the cannibalism charges added on without explicitly having these laws against cannibalism. But more often than not, if someone is in a court of law and cannibalism is involved, it is because they also killed an individual, so that is always going to kind of be the higher precedent. As we talked about earlier with voluntary cannibalism, there is voluntary cannibalism where there is no death and you take sections and eat off of a willing living person. And I do personally know individuals who have partaken in this action with their partners in, as we mentioned earlier, a means of love and devotion and something of that nature. I do want to go on the record that I have not eaten human flesh. I feel like after I'm so scared about how long this video is going to be. I'm so scared, dude. I've been ranting and rambling for so long. This is one of my, big topics for me. But, I've not eaten human flesh. In this current standing, I don't have any plans to do that. But I don't live in Idaho, so technically it doesn't matter anyway. And there are still, as I just mentioned, plethora of places for individuals who have this gratification, want to express themselves with other consenting people with the same interests, and will have no issue or harm to other individuals in the real world. This is something I discussed earlier on the Cannibal Cop individual, and I have also mentioned in the Necrophile with the class 1 of role players. There are people who role play cannibalism quite a bit, and it is completely safe and consensual. And again, when we talk about why people want to do things, it all goes to nature versus nurture. I feel like anytime I will talk about any paraphilia, it will be nature versus nurture, because that is truly what it is. And there is something about cannibalism. It is the ultimate taboo, and it is also something that, in a way, has that duality of being natural. And I it is so it is just, insane to me, the current, pop culture media resurgence of it. There is so much cannibalism in media. There just aesthetics, movies, books, literature, everything. There was that period of time on TikTok where everyone was going crazy for Tender is the Flesh. And, I was able to start curating an entire cannibalism movie list on my Letterboxd, which I have linked down below. I also am going to create them a lot in conjunction with video topics, so make sure to check that out down there. I was having a really hard time figuring out how to end this video, because I wanted to save objectively the most disturbing material to the end about the actual consumption. Sorry, the dog's here. He's throwing a tantrum. I was having a hard time how to figure out how to end this video, because I was I'm ending on the most disturbing part of this, so how do I pivot? So it's a bit of an abrupt end, but I didn't focus too much on the whole forums and stuff, because as I stated, I've been working on a video for 10 months that has a lot of that in it, so stay tuned for that. Ideally I will have that out before the end of the year. But that was a deep dive into human cannibalism, which I think is appropriate for this channel, and I understand it is very disturbing, taboo, interesting topic. And, I would love to hear your thoughts down below. Is there any media surrounding cannibalism you really enjoy? I mean, I think there are so many good movies that surround. I mean, one of my favorite movies, my Letterboxd top 4, one of them is the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which objectively has cannibalism. So, I think it is so prevalent in horror, real world, history, art, metaphors, everything. There's something so all-encompassing surrounding cannibalism in a very peculiar and odd way. And once again, I just want to say thank you so much for watching, liking, commenting, and subscribing. Thanks to all the members of the channel. You really do mean the most. Thanks for everyone who watches this. I feel like this video is going to be really discombobulated and kind of crazy, because per usual, I know I'm going to have to edit quite a bit of stuff out and see what we end up with. But Also, I'm just really scatterbrained. I've been very sick for like 2 weeks. I'm still really sick. I lost 2 nails today. I'm really all over the place, but you know, I wanted to still be able to, you know, make a video out of all the research I sit and do. So if you watched it, thanks for watching. Thanks for liking, commenting, and subscribing. If you like this video, you might like my video about the cannibal cop and the curious case of a thought crime. Once again, thank you. I will see you next time when I hopefully am less scatterbrained. My child is not having a tantrum and I'll have eyebrows. So goodbye. I'll see ya.